Good morning if you are in the West Coast, and good afternoon if you are in the East Coast, and good evening if you are joining us from across the ocean or Turkey. My name is Baki Tezcan. I teach history at the University of California in Davis, and I convene the online meetings of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. Today, you all know why you are here. I'm just going to very briefly introduce the panel and let the chairs take over from there. So we are here to remember Halil İnalcık, who taught many of us and who wrote books for the rest of us to read if you were not able to be his student. We lost him in 2016, and he's been remembered in various venues in Turkey and here. Most recently, two of his former students, Linda Darling and Fariba Zarinebaf, co-edited a volume that came to being by his former students at the University of Chicago, who put research articles in there and memories in there, and now today you'll hear from them. The co-editors of the volume, who are the chairs of the session, do not need any introduction, but let me just very briefly introduce them. Linda Darling is professor of history at the University of Arizona. She is very well known for those of us who work on the early modern period. Her Revenue Raising and Legitimacy is a major work on Ottoman financial history, Ottoman socioeconomic history that is a required reading for many of us. More recently, she published A History of Social Justice and Political Power in the Middle East. And Fariba Zarinebaf, she teaches at the University of California in Riverside. Like me, she is in the West Coast, and we are at the UC. She is the co-author of A Historical and Economic Geography of Ottoman Greece, and the author of two more recent books from both University of California Press, Crime and Punishment, Istanbul 1700-1800, and Mediterranean Encounters, Trade and Pluralism in Early Modern Galata. You can also find many of her articles put together in Women on the Margins, Gender, Charity, and Justice in the Early Modern Middle East. So now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Fariba first, who will start talking about the book. Yes, go ahead, please. Fariba, you are muted. There you go.
Thank you so much, Baki. I wanted to thank Professor Tezcan for all of you for being here. And as you know, we co-edited this volume, Archivum Ottomanicum, the special issue. In case you haven't had a chance to see it, I would recommend to get it online or get a copy of it, for your library, and read all the memories of his students with Halil Bey, because I think that's like the sweetest part of the fellowship. I must also add that we tried to reach to all of his students from the University of Chicago, including Professor Ortaylı and Nuri Cihan İslamoğlu in Turkey, but unfortunately they were not available. So what you see, the list is not a comprehensive list, and we tried very hard to ask his former students to contribute, but they couldn't. Professor İnalcık, who lived between 1916 and 2016, was from the last Ottoman generation of Crimean families who settled in the empire sometime in the 19th century, which clearly influenced his formation as a scholar of the Ottoman Empire from a global perspective. He was born in Istanbul to a father who was a trader of Cologne. After he lost his father at a young age, his mother took him to Ankara, where he studied Ottoman literature at the Teachers' College in Balıkesir under the supervision of Abdülbaki Kulpınarlı. After graduation in 1936, he joined the newly established Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi of Ankara University, where he studied Ottoman history with the eminent historian Fuat Köprülü. Both Köprülü and Barkan were influenced greatly by the French Annales School, which placed great emphasis on archival research on the social and economic history of rural France. After graduation, Halil Bey became a research assistant and a faculty member at Ankara University with a mission to correct the distorted history of the Ottoman Empire through the systematic study of Ottoman archival material and place it on a global framework. Professor Inalcik's studies on the origins of the Ottoman Empire and state formation built on the works of his mentors, Köprülü and Barkan, but went beyond their findings. He continued the debate that Barkan had started on the social and economic transformation of the Ottoman Empire and focused his lens on urban as well as rural history, where he had an enormous impact on the direction of the field, changing it from one that was philologically based to one that is theoretically informed. His effort in locating and making available Ottoman documents facilitated a detailed, document-based history of the empire's institutions, its daily life, social relations, and international trade and politics. His doctoral thesis, Tanzimat ve Bulgar Meselesi, published by the Türk Tarih Kurumu in 1942, focused on the impact of the Tanzimat land reforms on social upheavals in Bulgaria. Halil Bey believed that the Ottoman archival material on the Balkans, such as the Tahrir registers, provided important clues on Ottoman methods of conquest and provincial administration, and were thus crucial for the study of Balkan lands. His publication of the earliest known Ottoman cadastral survey, the Timar Defteri of Arvanet in Albania from 1431, provided rare information on the land tenure regime and rural population and governance. The study of these registers helped him formulate several key studies on land tenure and rural taxation in the early modern Ottoman Empire. In his later studies, Inalcik emphasized the Sasanian, Byzantine, Seljuk, and Ilkhanid models in the formation of the Ottomans' ruling institutions, fiscal and land tenure regimes. His findings on the early Ottoman history are unquestionably also crucial for medievalists in both Byzantine and Middle Eastern history. He published a long series of articles on landholding and taxation, and culminating in an economic and social history of the Ottoman Empire, published by Cambridge University Press in 1994. His earlier book, The Ottoman Empire, The Classical Age, is probably the most widely published book on Ottoman history in any language. But his most influential work appeared in article form, demonstrating the immense potential of research in the vast Ottoman archives in Turkey and in all the countries formerly part of the empire. Inalcik's own study of the Islamic court records of Bursa led to several key studies on Bursa and its silk industry and trade. I actually met him when he was working on this topic. His attention to social and urban history, primarily of Bursa and Istanbul, developed while he was at Chicago and formed part of his paleography training for his graduate students. He paid particular attention to the social and economic history of the empire rather than its political and military history. Together with one of his students, Victor Ostapchuk, was here, he published the customs registers of Kefe or Kafa, which shed an important light on Ottoman trade and traders on the Black Sea during the 15th century. Inalcik was critical of the studies of some Western historians on the Ottoman Empire and corrected their myopic views through long reviews of their books and theses, which didn't earn him many friends. At the same time, he was keen on collaborating with Byzantinists, Balkanists, and Europeanist historians to bring different perspectives and sources on the study of the Ottoman Empire and to set the empire on its proper place in the early modern period. He saw the need to rewrite the history of the Ottoman Empire based on a correct reading and analysis of Ottoman archival as well as manuscript sources. He believed that many Ottoman practices could be traced to Persian and Byzantine empires, from which the Ottomans borrowed heavily and directly. Ottoman high culture, music, and literature, he argued, had important Iranian precedents and were transmitted through Azerbaijani immigrants and refugees to the Ottoman Empire. He traced these influences in one of his latest books called Has Bahçede Ayşu Tarap, Nedimler, Şairler, Mitripler, which was published in 2011. So now I will briefly ask my colleague and friend, Linda Darling, to talk about his experience at Chicago and when he arrived there. Linda, you take over. Thank you. You have to unmute yourself, Linda.
Yeah. Thank you, Fariba. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We, Halil Bey students from the University of Chicago, take this opportunity to memorialize their time with him in this meeting and also in the collection of reminiscences and studies that we offered in his memory. Several festschrifts were published for him in Turkey, but we were not invited or even informed that they were happening. So after his death, we decided to publish our own. We attempted to include all his students from his Chicago days, even those who did not go into academia. Some we couldn't locate, some were too busy to contribute or whatever. But we also included a few students who wrote their dissertations with someone else, but who attended Halil Bey's classes and were inspired by him. Studying with Inalcik affected us all in different ways. Our festschrift includes a series of remembrances showing different facets of his students' experience at Chicago, and a group of articles, some on Ottoman society and institutions, and some on the Ottoman Empire's relations with the surrounding world. We've emphasized the use of the documentary record to correct stereotypes and traditional narratives, to understand how the Ottoman Empire worked and how its inhabitants lived, and to trace its connections to its contemporaries and its forebears. Inalcik at the University of Chicago planned to train a group of students in Ottoman history and to work closely with his colleagues to provide them with linguistic and paleographic skills, as well as a strong foundation in Middle Eastern, European, and Ottoman history. He believed that students of the Ottoman Empire had to study it based on its rich archives. He also valued the importance of the historical methodology that students could acquire in courses in European history at a place like Chicago. Inalcik developed intellectually at Chicago through his contacts with scholars in the Department of History, the Middle Eastern Studies program, as well as Near Eastern languages and civilizations. What he gave us in his class lectures became the basis for his contribution to the first volume of the Cambridge book edited by Inalcik and Khodarkovsky on Ottoman social and economic history. When I opened that book, I immediately recognized the things that he had told us in class. Inalcik became an international figure and took part as a keynote speaker in symposiums all over the US and the world. He received multiple honorary degrees and was invited to offer seminars at universities like Princeton and Harvard. He put a lot of time and effort into his research, of course, his numerous projects, and also into training more than 20 students at Chicago. In addition, he worked diligently behind the scene, with the Ministry of Culture and the directors of the Prime Minister's Archives to promote the opening of the Turkish archives. And I can remember when a conference on that theme was being held in Istanbul, I was doing my dissertation research, and people from the news media came in to interview people working in the archives. They interviewed, of course, the staff and so on, but then they came to interview the researchers. And here am I, a first-year researcher, trying to put together a sentence in Turkish about what I was studying. I remember that vividly. So I was on Turkish TV. Inalcik took students from various fields, European, Middle Eastern, Balkan studies, even ancient history, with the idea that their research would contribute to Ottoman studies from different regional perspectives and create a dialogue between regional specialists in time periods and those who study the institutions of the Ottoman central government. Studying the central archives in Istanbul was crucial to the histories of the provinces and of neighboring states as well as of the Ottoman government itself. While regional archives, like the Kadikort collections at a place like Damascus or Jerusalem, gave the provincial angle on what was happening in the Ottoman Empire, and the two needed to be tied together. Students and researchers in Istanbul, including Halil Bey himself, often stayed at the American Research Institute in Turkey, a residential and research hub for scholars of Turkish and Anatolian studies from all over the world. I met people there from Romania, from Japan, as well as Western Europe and the United States, and of course, Turkey. ARIT provided fellowships for graduate students and scholars, maintained hostels and libraries in Istanbul and Ankara for researchers. One of Inalcik's students, in fact, Anthony Greenwood, became the director of ARIT in Istanbul after graduating from the University of Chicago. He ran it successfully until 2018. It became an important residential and intellectual space for scholars and graduate students from, as I say, from all over the world, and provided important funding also for graduate students and scholars who studied Anatolia, Byzantine history, the Ottoman Empire, as well as modern Turkey. At the invitation of Bilkent University, he went there after retiring from the University of Chicago and founded its history department. He taught there until he passed away in 2016. Both there and at Chicago, he created a growing program that would continue training an international group of scholars, many of whom became leading Ottomanists in various countries. He became a university professor at Chicago, a title reserved for very distinguished scholars. In addition, he received many honors, medals, honorary degrees, including 23 honorary doctorates. And these are now displayed in the Halil İnalcık Center for Ottoman Studies at Bilkent, where his notes and documents from his three-quarter century of study are accessible to students and scholars. Professor İnalcık continued to do research and publish after he retired from teaching at Bilkent. He produced many important studies, publishing them up to and even after his death. He also founded the International Association for the Economic and Social History of the Ottoman Empire, commonly known as IOSA, to bring these scholars together every 3 years. The membership in the board of IOSA include his colleagues at Bilkent, some of his students from Chicago, students from earlier periods in his life, as well as prominent scholars from all over the world. He took a strong position against ethnocentric views and national historiographies. His vision was to take the conference and Ottoman history to the former lands of the Ottoman Empire, engage with local scholars, discover local archives, and expand the scope of the field beyond national histories, and engage in new approaches to the understanding of the empire as a whole. Having attended a number of these sessions, I can say he succeeded in doing that. And he also succeeded in bringing other people with him. The other International Organization for Ottoman Studies, CIEPO, has adopted many of the practices that IOSA initiated with this, in terms of the study, international study of the Ottoman Empire. In addition, the United States now has its own organization of Ottoman institutions. Fariba, Dan Goffman, and I started GLOW, the Great Lakes Ottoman Workshop, back in when? I can't even remember, 2013, maybe? And since then, WOW, the Western Ottomanist Workshop, and MEOW, the Mid-Atlantic Ottomanist Workshop, have followed in its footsteps. And these are organizations that were started without any institutional support or funding, just to bring Ottomanists together so that they could talk to each other. And they have developed each in their own ways in the period since then. So this attitude and the example of Halil İnalcık is now being passed to succeeding generations of students. We now invite you to share your memories and thoughts about İnalcık and about your work in his model. Baki, go ahead. Take over.
I think I'm going to
ask. Are you going to host it?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Professor Palmira Brummett to go first. She's an emerita from the University of Tennessee. Palmira, floor is yours.
Briefly, and I'm going to speak informally. And first, I want to say just one thing about the quads at Chicago that form part of the title for this work. Being at Chicago at that time was a place of intense intellectual exchange. It was a thrilling place to be a scholar at this time. Now, it was also an intensely patriarchal place, not always, but mostly. And that forms the context against which my graduate studies took place. I had intended to write my dissertation on the partition of India and Pakistan, but I got sucked in by the Ottomans. I met Halil Bey, and I asked him to be my professor for one reason, because I thought he was a great scholar, and he was a great scholar. In my little memento of Halil Bey, I know these things are supposed to be warm and fuzzy. I talked about how Halil Bey was very fond of little kids, and he really was fond of little kids. But Halil Bey was also a force of nature. He was a holy terror. He thought that graduate education was a guild system, and we all know where the apprentices stand in that construction of a guild system. When I was Halil Bey's assistant, we had many long arguments. You may find this hard to imagine, but we had many long arguments, both about the course of my dissertation and about interpretive matters. I don't think I ever won a single one, except that Halil Bey once told me he was tired and we should probably stop. But that was about as far as I got. Halil Bey trained 3 generations of researchers. And when I think back about the ways things proceeded in our classes, 2 things really stand out. One is that you could never bring up a subject in seminar that Halil Bey couldn't, he had a formidable memory, that he couldn't call to mind various documents that referred exactly to that question that you brought up. And he wouldn't just mention them in seminar, he'd bring you one the following.
Read my articles, he said. Read my articles.
But the other thing is that Halil Bey showed us how to focus on the details of the documents. And the details of the documents were important. They had to be analyzed rhetorically. They had to be stood on their head and see how they worked. And in the end, we learned that if the details of your documents did not go along with your historiographic narrative, then you better look again at your historiographic narrative. And that was an important lesson, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Palmira. That was wonderful. We next move to Professor Dan Goffman of DePaul University.
For everyone in London, I thank you for working hard to make the first for Halil Inalcik possible. I also thank Halil Inalcik for opening up a whole new world of studying Ottoman history. I went to the University of Chicago intent on studying Jewish history, but I soon found that Jewish history had been combed through by many renowned historians, and I did not know what I could contribute. I was about to give up when Halil Inalcik came forward. He proselytized Ottoman history to me. He said that a huge number of documents were sitting in the Başbakanlık archives in Istanbul waiting for historians to mine them. Of course, reading these documents would be difficult. He proposed that I enroll in his paleography class. I did that. When I went to Istanbul, I hoped I could read Ottoman well enough, but the archives presented a lot of challenges. I forged ahead with the help of other historians in the archives. and write a dissertation that satisfied Halil Bey and opened up the rest of my life. That's it.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was wonderful. And I met Dan in the archives when I was a grad student. I was actually coming in when Dan was finishing his research. I was just starting mine. So the archives was a great place to bring us all together. I learned so much there from graduate students. I made lifetime friendships. And of course, you know, Turkish scholars who took our hands. And Halil Bey would show up sometimes in the archives and would say, okay, Fariba, let's go to lunch. And then he would take me to these luncheons with the staff in the archives, and he would introduce them to me and say, this is my student, she's really great. So, you know, that lunch would be really important in getting access, because now I was associated with Inalcik. So we move next to Professor Michael Khodarkovsky from DePaul University.
Thank you, Fariba, except it's Loyola University, not DePaul University.
Oh,
I know
I'm
we're all
so
the same
sorry.
to you from California, but
I'm
there
so
are some
sorry. That
differences.
was, you know, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just want other people to know. Well, iyi akşamlar to those across the ocean, and hello to all my good friends and colleagues here. It's thank you for Baki for organizing this. This is fantastic. A reunion online. Well, what can I say? I could continue with the line that Palmira, I'm sorry, Palmira, I'm getting old, Palmira took, and that is the sense of terror and anxiety that every time I was going to a seminar on Tuesday afternoon, when I was getting in the elevator to take me to the fourth floor of this, I think it's called the Green Building, the one next to the current, with Kelly, Victor Ostapchuk corrects me, Kelly Building. And even after many years, after I graduated, every time I was going to this old Middle East center, as I got into the elevator, I had that sinking feeling. So that was all true. It was all true. But that was the price we paid for having a really fantastic world-class historian to teach us and to be available to us. That was so amazing about him, that he was always available. Once you prove yourself to him, he would make himself quite available. So on this basic informal little presentation here, I will mention two things in which I'm greatly indebted to Halil Bey. One of them, of course, is academically. So I arrived in the United States, arrived in Chicago as an immigrant from the Soviet Union, refugee actually, in 1979, came from Ukraine. A year later was accepted at the University of Chicago. And of course, eventually I began to study Russian history, but on the advice of Alexander Bennigsen, I decided, or he suggested, and I decided to take an Ottoman course. And that was a game changer for me. That was a revelation. Before that, I took several courses. One of them was William McNeill, the great historian of Western civilization, of many other things, a world history person. But I found William McNeill always a bit too general and a bit too superficial, and it didn't quite fit with what I thought of history should be like. My own advisor, Richard Haley, who was doing early modern Russian history, was sort of the other way around. He was very detailed oriented, very empirically oriented, but was often missing kind of a big picture and connecting things together and so on. And then I took a class with Halil Bey, and after the first class, I thought, this is it. So I am not lost here. This is exactly what I thought of history and how it should be done and so on. And I think what happened here, now that I think about it, was a marriage of me being a residual Marxist, the way I was trained in the Soviet Union, and Halil Bey, who comes from very much at that time, and probably until his life, influenced by the Anal school, which was the same sort of thing, you know, emphasizing socioeconomic structures and approaches and so on. So in some ways, Halil Bey saved me from my search for something in American academia that I didn't find until I took his course. And from that time on, of course, I remain a Russian historian of Russia, but I became partially an Ottoman historian as well. At least I know much more about Ottoman history than most other people who are not Ottomanist. So I was in Turkey for a year, working in the archives. I was learning Turkish from Robert Dankov, and so on and so forth. So the second thing that I want to emphasize, that he also indirectly, without knowing it, changed my personal and my social life, because I became attached to the Middle East Center, where I found, in fact, most of my friends. Some of you are here. Victor reminds me of various personal things that he knows and remembers sometimes better than I. But so Middle East Center was a great place at that time. There were sherry hours, as you remember, on Friday evenings. Not only people who studied the Middle East came, but people from other departments. After that, people got together, went to some restaurant. We graduate students got out and had some Indian food usually, on other things. So it had a great atmosphere that provided that social life that I was missing. History department at the time at the University of Chicago had zero social life. So that really also in many ways, and we begin to appreciate these things only later in life, informal things, also made my life much more interesting and much more, well, interesting, obviously. All right. On this social note, I'll pass the microphone or whatever it is to my friends who made that life so interesting at that time.
Thank you so much, Michael. That is so sweet. And I must say, Inalcik did also invite us to his house
Yes.
after his paleography class. So there was really a human element in him, and continued, hosting us in Istanbul in his wonderful place. And that's something that we all emphasize in the memories of him. So next is Professor Judith Mendelsohn Rood of Biola University.
Unmute.
Here's a copy of the book. It's very beautifully done. I must say, Linda and Fariba, you outdid yourselves. And I so enjoyed reading everybody else's recollections because we all had different angles on this. And one thing I have to say is Professor Inalcik, I called him Halil Bey, and he always called me Mendelsohn. So that was my name forever and ever. That's my middle name now. But when he met me, I wasn't married, and Mendelsohn stuck. And he transformed my life as well. But a little background that I didn't share before was that I had earned an MA at Georgetown University in modern Arabic. And I was dissatisfied with the program because I felt that they didn't go deep enough and they didn't deal with the Ottoman question. And so I applied to the University of Chicago to the Committee on Social Thought, which was a sort of a philosophical, political theory based program, but they sent me to the history department. And the history department then sort of sent me to the Middle East Studies people, and they said, you have to study Turkish. And I was like, no way. I mean, I'm studying Arabic. It's so, really hard. And I have to take advanced Arabic grammar with Stetkevich, another holy terror. And so while I was learning modern Turkish, I was also learning Ottoman Turkish and advanced Arabic grammar. And it was just so hard. I can't tell you how hard it was. Stetkevich had 3 students in his advanced Arabic grammar class, me, another student, and the Imam of Bosnia, okay? And we were sitting across the table from Stetkevich, and he was teaching us, and I was thinking, I have no idea I have no idea what he was talking about. Many years later, it all came together, but honestly, I was under so much pressure and trying to hold on to my scholarship and trying to keep up with all of my classes. It was a pressure cooker. It was so, so very hard. But Halil Bey was like a giant teddy bear to me. Everybody found him terrifying. I just found him luscious. It was always so much fun to go into his little office and just sit and talk with him. And he just basically said, listen, you're taking this course with Abdulkarim Rafik from the University of Damascus. You know, you're studying about the Arab provinces with him. You've studied this other stuff. I'm going to put you in touch with Amnon Cohen in Jerusalem, and you're going to do your work in the sigil of Jerusalem. And I was like, well, really, am I? How am I going to do that exactly? So the rest is history, as they say. And he just, okay, so I had to postpone getting my doctorate for 1 year because Halil Bey was not in the US. So when he was back, I was able to defend my dissertation. And of course, defending your dissertation is a scary thing. But I walked into the room and there was Halil Bey, and then Fred Donner was one of my other readers, and also Rashid Khalidi. And the three of them just treated it like a big family reunion. And I can't tell you how wonderful it was. So I'm so happy to be part of this remembrance of Halil Bey and those happy days at the University of Chicago. It really was intellectually just so far above any other experience I've ever had. It was all about the knowledge. It was not about politics. Halil Bey helped me see the deep structures of land tenure underneath the modern Middle East. He also was willing to interrogate Islamic law and Islamic thought with me, which was not where he usually went, but my thesis did. And he really felt that I had done something worthwhile. You know, it wasn't just get the dissertation done, get your degree. It was a contribution. And the paper that I submitted for the Archivum Ottomanicum volume was a seminar paper that I did for him in his social and economic history class. And that was just the kind of fun. I mean, writing that paper originally was for me fun. That was, all of my sources were English, you know, so let's just say that. But it was all so much fun. And I did find just a lot of happiness about the way that he prioritized collegiality. And that's why I called my little entry on him, The Virtues of Collegiality, which I sometimes feel is a lost virtue, especially with BDS and all the other stuff that's going on in the academic world. And I just wonder what he would make of some of the titanic political challenges that our times are facing. I wish that I had his ear so that I could just talk to him and hear his thoughts about some of the most troubling parts of Turkish life today and the world. And he just had such a peaceful attitude. And it's such a blessing to have known him. So thanks for opening this space, Becky. And you also have that virtue of collegiality, and I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was really touching. I was here during the Iranian Revolution, or at the conclusion of it. I couldn't go to Iran. I did go twice to do some research, and I came to work with John Woods on Mongol Tabriz. And I had only a Vakfnameh that was published to work on, but I didn't know how to analyze it. So Inalcik just opened this whole new world to me, you know, which became a lifetime fun research publication, given the fact that my own country was like, you know, melting down and still is, you know, as we speak. So I'm so glad that I switched and I can now look at Iran from a completely different lens and do something that other scholars of Iran cannot do. So thank you so much. We are now moving to Professor Ostapchuk of the University of Toronto.
Thank you, Fariba. You turn off the volume. So wanted to. I'm happened to be at the University of Chicago because of a conference, AAA up the Eurasianists and Slavic conference. But I wanted to broadcast as close as I could, or actually from that sacred room, Kelly 14, where his seminar room was next to his office. And so I went there with his psychology department there. And so I paid my obeisance to the kapı, to the gate, and came over to Michael Khodarkovsky, to Misha's house. Thank you, Linda, for letting me be part of the volume, because I'm essentially an interloper. My PhD was not from Chicago, but rather from Harvard. I started at the University of Chicago as an undergraduate with Halil Bey for 3 quarters, or actually one year and 1 quarter. But it turned out, for various reasons, interesting, that I ended up going to Harvard for the money, and I wanted to be there with Omiyan Prisak and the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, was Edward Keenan and Frank Sisson. But my plan was to have my cake and eat it too, and to work with Halil Bey. And I managed to do that, actually. But before I get to that, I'll tell you a bit about my article. It's basically very much of a hybrid, because it's an article and a memoir. I managed to present Halil İnalcık's early career primarily as a historian of the Crimean Khani and Black Sea, and not really the Ottoman Empire. And another part of my my article is explaining what made Chicago the place for Ottoman studies. And it was Halil Bey, but not only Halil Bey, it was the secret Ottoman archive, which involved Alexander Benningsen, and finally my own story. So because it was a combination, they put mine at the end of the memoirs to finish the memoir part, and the first article, so it's kind of a transition. So the first part about Inalcik between Crimea and Turkey, I called it. Of course, well, for both of us, our heritage is very important. His half Crimean Tatar, mine is Ukrainian, in deciding our life paths. And no question that there was a close connection for him, for Crimea, for him. His grandfather, Halil Ibrahim, who was named after, was the muezzin of the mosque of the former Khan's palace in Bakhchisarai, the Crimean Khanate. In the 40s, if you look at his bibliography, the Crimea and the Ottoman North, the Black Sea, was dominated his work. And only in the 50s, he became an Ottomanist, a great Ottomanist historian, but Crimea and Black Sea were always with him. And of course, intellectually, it makes sense. It's an important part of the region, understudied and so forth. But it so happened, I happened to chance upon 25 letters of his to prominent Crimean Tatar politicians and activists written between 1943 and 93. And we learned that he was very close to this circle. The chief of the circle was none other than Jafer Seyd Ahmed Kırımır, who was a legendary figure, served as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of War, and even Prime Minister of various Crimean Tatar republics during the chaotic Russian Revolution. He was not really a true member, but he was entrusted with a mission, namely to write a history of Crimea. And this was something urgent. There are, in the letters, meetings that are mentioned, he's being essentially hounded to write this thing. And he promises, he says in one letter to Seyd Ahmed in 1943, he says, "Now, compared to my other tasks at the faculty, I always think about the history of Crimea and work on it as my main duty," translating from Turkish. And they wanted anything, but he said, "I have to get a serious dictionary, a serious book." And in the end, he produced articles. He couldn't really do it until the very end of his life, when he wrote, published all of his collected articles in the Crimea and Black Sea. And interestingly, at the end of that, he writes. He expresses his sincere gratitude to Jafer Seyd Ahmed Kırımır for giving him the impetus to produce these works. So in the end, he did come through with his history. The other part about Chicago is important is Benningsen, the Benningsen, I call it. Benningsen, who's a professor at College Altitude, was half a year in Chicago as a professor of Russo-Turkish history. And he had a whole circle in Turkey that worked for 10 years in the Ottoman archives, collecting surreptitiously, essentially, documents. And he brought to Chicago the Muhimmed Defterleri and the Namid Humayun and other things, donated it to the department, basically. And then Halil Bey then added a lot of his stuff. So I call it the Bennington Inalcik Ottoman documents collection. It was a big secret, of course, and it was a terrible times because access was very difficult. And it was a secret until Halil Bey spilled the beans in his autobiographical Sheikh story told by himself, where he tells about this whole thing, and he gives Bennington a lot of credit. But that made Chicago Inalcik and the Ottoman archives, that made it what it was. And coming to my story, well, for me, running into him, it was kind of clearly a proof of divine providence. So weird things happen. In the University of Chicago catalog, I noticed Halil İnalcık written with this funny eye and other eye with no dot, and that caught my attention. And I wandered into the seminar, and when I did, first thing he asked me to fill out a 3x5 card, and I said that I have Ukrainian, some Polish and Russian. He latched onto me, broke up his seminar, talked for 15 minutes about the Cossacks and how important they were in the 17th century, what they did in the Black Sea, just a factor of so-called turmoil, decline, whatever you want. And at that moment, I was hooked. It changed my life completely. And with Bennington, both you must learn Turkish, you must learn Arabic, you must learn how is your Persian today, and so forth. So the two of them, and they had this narcotic, and of which there was plenty of supply in Chicago. It's known as the Ottoman documents. But it's a narcotic that you have to have a lot of training to be able to use. And so I went to Harvard. I was told by Shinasi Tikin that's no way Pritsak and Inalcik are have big egos. You never can work with both of them. But it was not true. They got along, and I managed to, after my generals, go there, train with Inalcik for a year. And I kept up. Basically, he's my co-advisor unofficially, but in the end, he signed my dissertation, so he's officially a co-advisor, supervisor. And in fact, my real Dr. Father, as far as the Ottoman work, my work goes. And we kept up in the following years. When I went to Ukraine, we brought him to Ukraine, to Crimea. It was very emotional for him. I was mentioned here the artisanal craftsmanship, or whatever, guild system. Well, in fact, it was Kuluk, slavery. I immediately, gladly did Kuluk for him, fixing his articles, editing his articles, and he liked me doing it because I did a very conscientious job. In the end, the Kafka Customs Register, which is a collection of things he'd done over the years, since it was important, I managed to parlay it to be published by the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, where I was then. And so that meant I had to basically help rewrite it, fix it. I mean, I don't take any credit for the content, but that was along. And I have some stories in the memoir about funny stories about our fights. And the Kamenicci Defter with Dariusz Kozechik, I managed to get money for him through Harvard to go to Princeton to work with him. And unfortunately, Dariusz is unable to be with us now because he had a stroke and he survived. But he and Inalcik and I, we helped him produce this Kamenicci, a wonderful publication of this wonderful Defter, kind of a novel edition. So Halil Bey and I, we really have quite a long history. And as far as I've said anecdotes I wanted to put in but couldn't, but I'll hint one with one prominent Ottoman scholar. He had an argument running argument about the 17th century and this business of Jalavids and Levants. And this scholar said, I have other proof or don't have proof. In the end, he lost his temper, and he said, "You must know one thing. Inalcik is never wrong." And the thing was, it was really very true. He often, even if he didn't have all the, he had a very good intuition. And too often, unfortunately for those of us fighting with him, it was true that Inalcik was never wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. That was so timely. Yeah, he used to say that, and he used to also tell us, you have to be better than me. You have to work hard and be better than me. Okay, we move next to Professor Mark Stein of Muhlenberg College.
Thanks, Fariba. Thanks, everybody. It's a bit daunting to speak after all my friends and colleagues who are here. And to talk about Halil Bey, I just will also speak fairly informally. What I want to say ties into things that Victor said, everybody has said. Halil Bey's sort of knowledge of the Ottoman Empire was encyclopedic, and his ability to send you to an article or to a document was also pretty phenomenal, often accompanied by reaching into his chest pocket of his suit jacket and pulling out a stack of little pieces of paper, and he would rifle through them and hand you the bibliographic reference for exactly what you needed for that piece of work. The other part of it, though, was that Halil Bey understood as Victor just said, Inalcik was always right. Halil Bey very well understood his own positioning within the field of Ottoman studies. And, you know, we all of us who work with him and everybody who studies Ottoman history knows that at some point, no matter what the topic is, Inalcik did indeed write about it. And he was always very careful to make sure people understood that. Any piece of work you gave him, a seminar paper, an article, a dissertation chapter, the first thing he would do was flip to the back and look through the bibliography. Presumably, well, I won't. He then once said to me after reading a piece of work that I had, and we were talking about it, he said, you know, it's a little upsetting. My students never referred to me in their work. And I was really taken aback. I mean, in the piece that I had given him, there were probably 5 different articles I had cited. I was really kind of shocked, and I thought for a minute, and then I said to him, you know, Halil Bey, we've all just internalized it. And in fact, I think we really have. Certainly those of us who worked with him and anybody who enters into studying Ottoman history, when push comes to shove, we have all internalized a lot of what Halil Bey did and wrote about. And so I think, you know, for good or ill, he's inside our minds constantly. So I think that's probably it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. Anyone else? I don't have anyone else that Baki is putting on the list, but I think we have some of his students. Madeline is there. Joanne
Yes.
is here.
But Fariba, I think Christine is going to join us, but she's going to join us late because she's teaching. But before, so while we are waiting for her, I think Fatma Müge Göçek was here and she raised her hand earlier. We could give her the floor for, and I could say a few things. And I also see a few people who work with him at Bilkent later. If they would like to say things, that would be good too. But Müge Hocam, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I am here. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Thank you for this occasion. It's wonderful to see all the friends I made at the University of Chicago when I went there, because what happened was I was working at Princeton with Bernard Lewis at the time, planning to do Ottoman history, and he said to me, "You cannot do Ottoman history without working with Halil İnalcık." I said, "Well, where is he? He's in Chicago." He says, "Well, you have to go there and work with him." Very much as a part of this apprentice system, I guess. So I went there for the whole month of January when I was a graduate student, when it was extremely cold in Chicago that year. I stayed at the International Center there, or International House, I guess you call it, for a whole month. And I got to meet all the people who've been working now, talking about it now. And I worked with him. And he had a lot of fun because he would pull out these documents, Xeroxes of documents, archival documents from all over, and then he would give them to me to read. And so I would try to read and decipher it, and then I would bring it back. And of course, because I wasn't able to make heads or tails of any of it initially, I would come up with these very fantastic stories about what the document was about. And he laughed and laughed and laughed. He says, "You are so creative in what you're doing." And then he says, whenever he wants to have fun, he would just give me a document to read to see what I would come up with. So it took some time for me to sort of get it down. That was probably the most exciting thing. The other thing I remember is after working with him for a month there, then he came to Princeton, as it was mentioned, by Linda, giving these seminars. So I also worked with him there. And then one time we're walking back, after the seminar, as we're walking, there was a $20 bill on the ground. I said, "Hocam, there's a $20 bill." I said, "I wonder whose it is." He said, "Well," he said, "in Ottoman times, this happened." He says, "There is, especially in the marketplace, there would be some money." So he says, he picked it up. He says, "Bu paranın sahibi var mı? Bu paranın sahibi var mı? Bu paranın sahibi var mı?" He called like 3 times in Turkish. He looked around and there was no one, obviously. So he gave it to me and he says, "Well, officially, this doesn't have an owner, so it's now yours. So that was fascinating for me to do. And then from then onwards, whenever we worked, I mean, he also, of course, since we're both Turks and all that, he always thought that he wasn't acknowledged enough in Turkey. He wanted to join the Türk Tarih Kurumu, but they hadn't invited him at the time. So I felt very good later on when he went back so that, you know, he could get all the accolades that he wanted and thought he was missing for being overseas and away from it all. So I remember him with great fondness. I will never forget and love the warmth with which he approached Ottoman sources. I remember even at the Topkapı Museum, where there was this martinet called Ülke Hanım, you know, who would treat all the documents like her own personal babies who didn't want anyone to touch anything. So then she proudly said to Halil İnalcık, she said, "Hocam, I'm not letting anyone touch them or do anything with them," thinking he was going to say, "Oh, great." He said, "Oh no, Ülke Hanım," he said, "give them, let them see, let them try to write things on it. Why do you think we're all there globally? We'll make sure that they do make correct interpretations of it. So please give them out as much as you can." And I said, "Oh my God, thank you, thank you, thank you." You know, I don't know if it changed her or not, but that was my other memory of it. And of course, he was very good friends with Bernard Lewis, and they respected each other a lot because they were born on the same day. And I think maybe the same year or very close. And that's always why they thought, you know, very fondly of each other. And that's it. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share with you this wonderful, lovely man.
I might pipe in, he once said that Bernard Lewis is the most intelligent man he ever met.
Interesting. Yes, there you go. Yeah. And politics never came into the picture, that's for sure as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Göçek. We used to see you, yes, in his seminars. Those were really wonderful days, ending in his place for dinner later. So next is one of his last students, Professor Christine Isom-Verhaaren from Brigham Young University, who has just joined us. So Christine, it's your turn. And I think after that, Baki.
All right. So my last name is actually Isom-Verhaaren. So just to get the pronunciation right. So yes, I actually became one of Halil Bey's students when he was essentially not at Chicago very much anymore. And so I only got to work with him a little, but I still consider myself to be one of his students. And I have a little memory of going over documents with him. Once when he had come back, he was no longer permanently in Chicago, but he would kind of have this annual visit, and you would go to the International House and you would see him. And for some reason I had my son with me. He was like, I don't know, maybe 6 months old or something. And he was dressed in the snowsuit with a furry hood. And Inalcik said, "Oh, he looks just like a little Mongol prince, just like Genghis Khan." And I was like, you know, most Americans would not consider your baby looking like Genghis Khan as a compliment, but he definitely meant it that way. So I remember going and working with him with my documents that I had collected at the archives. And so when we were putting the volume together, I very much wanted to do my chapter on a document that I'd actually worked with Inalcik, that he had helped me translate, that I had found in the Topkapı archives about correspondence between Francis and Suleiman. And so, and this didn't end up in my dissertation in a later book. And so, you know, it was an opportunity to put it into the book. And for me, it just made the perfect memorial for Inalcik because it epitomized Inalcik for me. He was able to read this document that was, to decipher it to begin with was so difficult. And it had very strange terminology in it because it was supposed to be a letter from the King of France to Suleiman, but it was in, Ottoman Turkish. So it had very strange terminology, and just have someone who had so much knowledge to bring to something that would otherwise have been, really, probably way beyond what I would have been able to do. With his help, I was able to get the translation. And then later I found another document in the collection of Charrière of French documents that went with it. And so I was just so glad to be able to contribute that to the volume, because it's my total memories of working with Inalcik and, teaching me, how to read documents and to really love documents and what we can learn from them. So that's kind of my memory. And so if you do ever, read that particular chapter, it's my little honor to him for all the influence he had in my life as a student. It's really important to me.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I had, the wonderful privilege of being also his colleague at WilCanTU, when he joined, and he was creating a graduate program in the history department. Baki was there. So I saw another angle of him, and we socialized a lot. We used to go to the Calais and hang out and have dinner with a bunch of friends. And he used to come to my apartment in the guest house. We were working on this Ruznamche Defteri. And on Sundays, he would bring food, and he would say, okay, Fariba, I'm going to cook something and you cook something, and we'll sit together and read this thing. So for 2 hours, 3 hours, we would have our brunch and then work on this document on the Ruznamche Defteri. And it just showed another side of Halil Bey. He was my colleague, but we had the same relationship and more. And then he used to come to Chicago, and I would invite him over, and my parents just adored him, and he adored them. So there's this human side to him that is just so amazing. And he kept this permanent relationship with his students and kept coming to Chicago, even though he was at Bilkan and very busy there. But he kept his ties with Chicago for a long time. And you were fortunate enough to work with him. So now we're going to hear from Baki and his experience with Halil Bey at Bilkan.
Thank you. I cannot claim to have been his student, but I did take a seminar with him. Maybe I should first say that I think, looking back, what he did at Bilkent, of course, at the time I didn't realize this, but was something very important. Bilkent didn't have a history department, so he basically established it. He was the founder of the department. And in Turkey, in most history departments, you have nothing but Turkish and Ottoman history. But at Bilkent, he established the department in such a way that there would also be the possibility of focusing on European history or American history. So that is something we don't realize, because we are all Ottomanists. We think mostly of Ottoman history, but he kind of tried to bring in a larger world to teaching history in Turkey. Boğaziçi is the one university where you can get out of Ottoman and Turkish history to other areas. But other than Boğaziçi, many universities simply don't cover the world. So he wanted to bring that in. That is important. In terms of my experience, I was lucky. I was in my last year, a senior student, and in international relations. And he started the preparatory class of the master's program. He envisioned the master's would take 3 years. 1 year would be preparatory class and 2 years the master's. So they admitted the first cohort of students. It was the fall of 1993. I was a senior in international relations and asked for permission to join the seminar as an auditor. And so it was wonderful to get Ottoman history from him. And I was sharing this with my colleagues right before I let everybody else in. It was as if we were listening live when he talked about Suleiman and Hungary and Hurrem's letters. It was as if, you know, he was there and reporting live from the battle scene about Suleiman's love poem to Hurrem, reading it and everything. It was amazing. It was pretty taken experience. So I can see how so many of you who actually came to graduate school with the aim of studying something else ended up studying Ottoman history because his persona was very, very strong. And I can also relate to something else Mark said, the reading your pieces. I sense that in the seminar, because in the seminar we read almost nothing but him. So there was only maybe one piece by Fikret Adanır on Mezra, and maybe something else, but everything else was by him. So I sense that is sort of was his thing. He really liked to be read. And so there was a term paper to be written. So I wrote it too, even though I was auditing. Until that moment, he was just taking me as a not so serious student. That year, this book had come out. It's a translation, English translation of some of the articles that he wrote in Turkish by Douglas Howard. It was published, The Middle East and the Balkans Under the Ottoman Empire, Essays on Economy and Society from Indiana University. He gave a copy of it to each of the master's students, but not me, because I was an auditor, I guess. After he read my paper, though, he called me to his room and he signed it. Gave me a copy too, because I did figure, well, you know, he really likes his own work to be coded. And I wrote the paper mainly coding his, citing his work. It ended up being a good paper too, as you know, many of you said. He really published so much on so many topics that you can always find an Inalcik article on anything and everything. It was pretty amazing. So after that, I continued a little bit more for a second semester with him, but at that time I was trying to apply to the States, and then I came to graduate school in the States. But there are some people here who were with him at Bilkent, and I believe his very last student at Bilkent is with us. So I'm going to see whether he could tell us a little bit more about his work at Bilkent. Fahri, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead, Fahri. Fahri Dikkaya is, I think, his last student at Bilkent.
Yes, I'm the last PhD student of Halil İnalcık. And first of all, I want to say that Vefa is very important for Halil İnalcık. He told me every time, Vefa. And I think Fariba and Linda show their Vefa to Halil Hoca with this book and with this meeting. And if he see all of these things, he could have been very, very happy, I know. So thank you so much for this book and for this meeting. I'm working on the foundation of Ottoman Empire with Halil Hoca, and it was so difficult for me in the first period. I feared, I was really scared of him, and I'm not a religious person, but before going to meeting with him in his house, I prayed what I know in the religion in the first period, and he was so difficult person in the first period when I began working with him. He sometimes shouted, sometimes could be very difficult. I think it was his strategy for his students. I think he wanted to construct the connection with his students, and after that you feel his power, and you don't want to behave without his permission in this context. And I felt that. And in the first period, I remember one day I cried in the office of Mary Henrietta Gates, the archaeology department. So it was very difficult, but when I gave my first chapter to him, everything's changed. After that, I saw his support and his protection also. And my writing process was very productive for me. And he was very helpful, and he wrote the books or the articles that give to me Fahriye, to Fahri, with his handwriting. And he was thinking of my thesis, and he helped me every time. So he was so helpful and very protective in the second part of my writing process. And so he was almost more than 95 when I worked with him. And sometimes I thought he didn't remember anything, or he didn't remember something, but he remembered everything. So he was more than 95, but he remembered everything. And he was excited to find some new things. He was 100 years old, 101 years old, and he told me every time new things and new findings, and he excited every time about this kind of things. So Halil Hoca gave us a different perspective, I think, a different being a different person. So he is immortal, I know, and we in Bilkent we said he's immortal every time, but he's still immortal, I think, and that's all. I miss him, and I'm so lucky and I'm so proud to be his student.
Thank you so much, Fahri. We visited him at Bilkent with Linda. I think it was 2011 or 12. And we went to his house, although, you know, we could see that he was really aging. And he had piles of books on his desk with all these notes in between. Amazing, you know, that he was still reading and, you know, writing these articles. And he gave me and Linda each boxes of books that we brought back of his latest, and I'm still reading them. So he kept publishing, which is really amazing. So we have a note from his daughter, Günhan İnalcık, that she sent to Victor, and Victor would like to read that. So let's turn to Victor.
So this came yesterday. I guess she couldn't make it. Dear Professor Ostapchuk, I am deeply moved and would like to convey my appreciation for this wonderful commemoration. Please give my message of appreciation and thanks to all contributors. I would also be proud to receive any document available following this conference. It will be a very important part of my father's legacy, a museum which we are planning. With my best regard, thank you again, Günhan İnalcık. And I might add, as far as his legacy goes, there was a website called inalcik.com that had all of his articles, access to, scanned in various quality, and then it sort of went quiet. It still exists as a 404. It's just been shut down. And some scholars have told me that this is really important, that this kind of a website, we can find out who's behind it, or there should be such a website on the web. It'd be very important, I think. Thank you.
We have been having a conversation with Baki to establish an award under his name. And Baki can tell us the details, but it requires, of course, you know, budgets and donations. but that could be something that we could think about, in a few years down the line. Bucky, do you want to add something to that?
Well, as the president of the association, I don't feel comfortable to initiate anything. I'm rather in a position to respond to grassroots actions. So if his students would like to get together and consider creating something in his name, an award, a prize, something, I think that this could be an opportunity for you to connect with each other and see whether you can come up with an idea, and then I'd be, of course, happy to bring that to the board, and then we could consider it for sure, definitely. But because I'm the president, I don't feel like it's my job to initiate things. However, if you are willing to do a little get together, bring people together and raise some funds, of course, why not? We would definitely consider it. I do see other students of him from Bilkent. İpek Yosmaoğlu is with us, and she I think joined the master's program and got, if I remember correctly, İpek, correct me if I'm wrong, got your master's at Bilkent, although you worked in late Ottoman history. I think you took classes with Halil Bey. Would you like to say a few things, İpek?
If I can unmute myself. First of all, I'm really sorry. I look horrible because I'm sick. So my apologies. And I also came a little late because I was supposed to be at a conference today. Obviously, I couldn't go. I was sending comments to the conference. But I actually never completed my MA there. I started there. It was the same year, Baki, you and I were in the same class. And I remember that seminar quite well. It just like you explained, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And because Halil Bey, as you all know, when you listen to him, it's as if, he was alive at the time. That's how he is, relating these stories. And you feel like you live them too. And by the way, Baki, that paper that we were expected to write, it's not just he liked himself being cited, he expected us to cite him. So I remember he gave us this, pile of articles and the book, and he said, go write a paper. And I remember thinking, how am I going to come up with an argument here? And can I criticize him? What are we supposed to do? So in the end, I picked a theme and I wrote about it. And it was just like you get called to the office. This is like an important rite of passage, right? And he tells me, the paper was excellent and all of that. And Halil Bey was, he thought that it was very significant that I had a degree in econ. I had just graduated from the econ department. Çilemi doldurmuştum. I mean, even though I hated it, it was all applied math. I really wanted to do history. So he thought that I would be I had the potential to be one of the best, economic historians of the Ottoman Empire. And he told me as such. So I remember feeling really elated when I left his office, to get such compliments from someone like Halil İnalcık. It was unbelievable. But little did he know, I actually did not want to do, I wanted to work on the late Ottoman Empire. And I actually did not want to stay at Bilkent because I thought that having Inalcik is one thing, but that Professor Inalcik, as wonderful as he is, he does not make by himself a history department. So I decided to apply, to several known institutions in the US. And I spoke with him, and I recall, and this is a different side of him. I'm sure most of you will recognize this. He had Rahmet eylesin, a selfish side as well. And I remember clearly he told me, I will not write you a recommendation letter, because he said it would be as if I'm admitting that I wouldn't do a good job training you, Cornell would do a better job. the thing is, I wasn't even going to work with Cornel Fleischer. I wanted to work with Şükrü Hanioğlu. And in the end, I did. But I think he never forgave me for that. In fact, he said as much. He said as much to me and to other people. But, having said that, and maybe this is a, side of him that wasn't that pleasant, it was part of the whole package. And that was another side to that package. I find it really significant, consider his age, consider the, milieu in which he grew up, he, became a scholar. And this man, I never got a shred of sexism from Halil İnalcık. To the contrary, he really cherished, supported, mentored his female students. And ironically enough, when I went to the US, that this was not really the norm in our field, in academia in general. So it is to his credit, may he rest in peace. That's why he was able to, raise, train, foster so many fantastic female historians, and you see some of them here today. So I guess that's what I wanted to share. The one final thing is he used to drink like a fish. I mean, I have seen him, he used to drink rakı without water. I remember having dinner with him and I thought he was drinking water. Then I realized it was rakı. So yeah, I guess that's all I want to share.
Thank you, İpek. I agree with you that he was very supportive of his female students. In fact, I think he got along with us much better than with the boys. So that's well said. So I think I'm going to turn to Joanne, who's from outside our field, from ancient history from the Oriental Institute at Chicago. And she had really sweet memories of Halil Bey. So Joanne, it's your turn. Professor Skurlock.
All right. I came into Halil Bey's course for completely different reasons than probably everybody else did. Essentially, I was interested in ancient Mesopotamia, always have been. And the problem with the department that I'm in is that all the history is on the Islamic side of the department. And whereas on the cuneiform side, we had one person calling himself a historian who was better described as a chronographer. And that is exactly what I was told about him. And everybody else, it was just language, philology. So I came out of the program and I had finished and I was getting ready to write my dissertation. And I'm like, I want to be a historian. I came here wanting to be a historian. Hey, it's ancient stuff, but that doesn't mean you can't do history on it. And so I looked at the Islamic side of the department and went, oh, I can learn how to do history. Now, I could have gone to the history department, and I did, but as it was mentioned already, the history department at that point really didn't have a lot going for it. Honestly, there are very few people you could study with. I did take a course from Heli, by the way. So I plumbed whatever depths it had. And so then I started going through, at the time, the Middle East, our department, the Near Eastern Languages and Civilization department, the Islamic side, we had Stephen Humphreys, we had, and Halil İnalcık, we had these great names, real historians, and the opportunity to study with them was it was just a thrill for me. So I came into İnalcık's class basically wanting to learn, I wanted to learn about Ottoman history and so forth, but also what I wanted to do was just learn how to be a historian. That was sort of my goal in coming into the class. Well, all right, so you can imagine, and I'm auditing, of course, because this is after I finished my coursework, and I'm not going to, I audited a lot of courses. So anyway, I come in as an auditor, and then I didn't tell him I wanted to learn how to be a historian, but I thought I was the ancient side of the department and do some about ancient Near East, the Near East and so forth. And what was interesting, and a woman, of course, and he clicked into colleague mode. He treated me as a colleague, basically. And I got to see sort of how he ended, a female one at that. And it was wonderful. So there would be times we would come along and I would ask a question that basically related something that he had just talked about or had explained to something in ancient Near Eastern in my side of the department, which I had discovered with his help, obviously, to do. And he was delighted when I would do these things. He was very welcoming to that. And we got along like a house on fire. And so I have one story I can't resist telling about his class, which was fun. The Mustafa was mentioned here, the Imam of Bosnia. Actually, that's not his actual title. He's the Rais al-Ulama of Bosnia, which is essentially the Sheikh al-Islam. That is his position. So it's way, way higher than all that. But at the time, he was an imam he's now Rais al-Ulama, but he was at the time an imam in a mosque, and he was serving, earning money basically to finance his education. Okay, so he, Inalcik used to teach. He was so into the teaching that he would go way past. The quarter system was like really constraining for him. It did not, when you're used to semesters, quarter is like this incredible squish. And so what he would do is he would teach all the way through the class time. He'd lecture all the way through exam week, and then he would have an exam sort of like after everything else. You would finally get your exam, which you'd have to come in for. Well, anyway, he picked a day. You can pick any day you want. There's no scheduling, and he picked Friday. And Mustafa, he sort of went, I'm sorry, sir, but I can't make it. And he says, well, why not? What's wrong? This is because I worked that day. And he said, and I quote, can't you work some other day? Yes. So that's just sort of a story. But the other thing that I think I put in the volume is that we ran into him in Turkey. We were going around. We went to the Topkapi, and we were going around and taking pictures and so forth. And we discovered that some of the places that we had heard a lot about and heard talked about in his classes were not open at the time. Either they were not open or you couldn't take pictures in them if they were. You could just see through a little, one of them, I think this is the throne room, you could only see through a glass, and that was it. And one of them, the place where the Vizier's Council actually met was completely closed. The one that's under the tower, that room, it was under renovation. They'd actually finished the renovation, but they hadn't gone around to opening it yet. Anyway, so we ran into him there, and he said, how are you enjoying it? I said, it's a beautiful palace, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. But there's two things we kind of wanted to get into that are closed. And he said, so he took us by the cuff and dragged us into, we went through the entire range of the administrators of the place. We went up through and we got permission to see those places. And a woman was delegated to come, and she opened the door for us to these places, and we were allowed to take pictures in them. At that time, you couldn't take pictures. You were not supposed to take pictures anywhere it was off limits for photography at all. So, he opened doors for us. So that was just, the things that he would do for, colleagues. It's just amazing how he was. So that this is I have that was very positive memories of him. The other thing, which is kind of an eerie story about sort of the more supernatural aspects, you might say, of the larger than life aspects of Halil Bey, is that we were sitting in one of the fish restaurants. I was with Linda, so she'll remember what happened here. Is that we were eating away and having dinner, and I looked out. It was after dark, and I looked out, and there was a completely empty street outside, except for under one street lamp, there was a single person alone on the street, like a mirage, smoking a cigarette. And who was it but Halil Bey? I'm like, whoa. It was like seeing a vision of somebody literally appearing out of nowhere. So of course, we invited him in, and he came in very graciously and sat with us for a few minutes and so forth. So yeah, it was lovely.
Thank you, Joanne. Well, he used to tell us that the reason for his longevity was he would stop working after 5. So if you wanted to join him, and he used to sit at Aret where he stayed and watch all these concerts of Turkish classical music and comedies. So if you wanted to go with Halil Bey to coffee or dinner or whatever fish, he would say, yes, I will join you on the condition that you're not going to talk about work. So he really stuck to that. He said, we will go, but don't ask me, to answer any questions. He just wanted to relax.
He told me, as I wrote in the article, the reason for his longevity is that he gets enough sleep, and he's a Tatar, though he'd protested me calling him a Tatar once. I'm a Turk. Anyway.
That might have something to do with his interest in Bulgaria. The Bulgars are actually Tatars originally.
We have a Bulgarian student of his here from Bilkan. Gregor is here. I don't know if he wants to say anything.
Yeah.
Professor Boykov?
He might be undisposed. He's coming up.
I'm fine. I'm fine. But he wrote to me, I just said that I need to feed a hungry teenager, and she's done. So I followed the whole conversation, and I have to say that I greatly enjoyed it. And from my perspective, I'm really impressed by the Chicago group, that Chicago group that Halil Bey managed to really bring together, and this entire generation of esteemed scholars that I see in the room. And I'm rather a different case. I'm rather from Halil Bey's Bilken era, slightly after Baki. Unlike many people in the room, I had the time to spend. I had the opportunity to spend with Halil Bey a lot of time. I think I did this 3-year MA, and then it took me forever to complete my PhD. So I probably spent altogether more than 10 years with Halil Bey. So my recollections with him are, I don't know, countless. But I was thinking that probably I could share with the group my first encounter with Halil Hoxha. That was a really interesting story. So both Maria and I authored an article when we were undergrads. That was rather our fascination that we can read Ottoman sources as undergrads, and we took the earliest register of Filibe, translated it and analyzed it to the best of our undergrad capabilities, and published it in a reputable Bulgarian journal. And then we applied for an MA at Bilken, and strangely enough, Halil Bey took us. And then I remember this first encounter with our future advisor, that Maria and I entering the office of Halil Hoxha, and I see him keeping our article in his hands. And then that was the moment I thought, that's a problem, because in that article, although we dealt with the register, we had to tell in which year the city was conquered, and that is really related to the chronology of conquest of Edirne. And as you all were aware in this room, there are multiple chronologies, and Halil Bey has one hypothesis is 1361, while other scholars would argue for different hypotheses. And back then, completely ignorant, we picked up Bildiciano and not Halil Bey's hypothesis. And I remember him keeping the article, and on the side is his paper on Edirne and Bildiciano's paper on Edirne, and say, good to see you. That is a fine paper that you wrote, but now your first assignment as an advisor, I would give you a common assignment that you both read these articles together, and you produce a paper and tell me who has the better argumentation. And and I think it was Mark who said that he wanted to be all right. He sent us with the words, I don't want to be right on all points, but on this point, I'm right. So yeah, that's how it started. It ended up years later in a similarly comic way. From my personal perspective, I was already back to Sofia. I got a job and I needed my degree. And I also had a dissertation written. It only needed that Halil Hoxha sits and reads it and comments on it, and we go for the defense. And it takes ages. I'm sitting in Bulgaria, I'm working, people kind of being very patient with me, but still there is some pressure that at some point I should present a degree. and I'm calling him every month, once per month on the phone. I say, Hocam, what's going on with my dissertation? Did you read it? I say, no, I'm still reading it. And I know it's nonsense because all of you who know him, you know, if he reads it, he'll read it in a day. And then he'll have his comments and all the stuff. And then all of a sudden, Oktay calls me, Oktay Özel, and says, you know, you'd better come to Bilkent because Halil Hoca says you're not ready. I say, oh, that's a problem. No, so I take the bus from Sofia, travel to Ankara, see him, go to his place, you know. I say, congratulations, it's an excellent dissertation. I said, thank you so much. He says, I have some remarks. I said, well, that's very natural. You're my advisor. I would like to fix those, and so that we go together to the jury. I said, no, I'll tell you the jury. And at that point, I said, well, you know, wouldn't it be more logical that we set it straight between advisor and an advisee? You know, I'm your student. So no, I tell you the jury. And that's how we went to the jury, you know, a month later or something. And it ended up in an interesting situation because his remarks I couldn't accept. And so we had a interesting discussion about over terminology, and I ended up not accepting. He said, okay, we agree to disagree. And he passed me, which I'm very grateful for. But we had a very, very interesting defense. And then Oktay Özel asked me after the defense, because Ergenç was all sitting in the jury. I said, what Ezer Hoca said about that? I said, oh, strangely, Ezer Hoca kept silent. And then Oktay said, well, he was probably shocked that somebody could speak to Inalcik like that. So in a way, you know, that's the comic side of the story. I would think that he really liked people who could stand their ground. In the case, he passed me because I stood my ground. Not that he agreed with what I said, but I managed to stand my ground. And he was extremely, as Fahri said, supportive in many endeavors. He had of course the sort of selfish side sometimes, but most of the time I've seen really a great support in my studies from Inalcik, and basically whatever I know, I mostly I owe it to him. And Baki, you've been to this seminar. I've done years of this seminar. Every year it was different because he could just pick up a topic and speak, and sometimes leaves you speechless because you see that's not prepared. He's improvising. There is a term coming out, and he will take you to the Ilkhanits and how the term developed into the late Ottoman chancellery, and how it is in modern Turkey, and this and that. It's just out of nothing. So yeah, these are people from different time, and I'm really feel privileged being his student.
Thank you so much, Gregor. That was lovely. Thank you. Baki, you take over.
Oh, I see some hands raised. Let's give the floor Judith and then Maria. Judith, please go ahead.
Thanks. As all of you have been talking about your memories, I have to add one ingredient. I'm just going to say an incident that we all remember in our little group, the rolling eyes incident. Now, that was the shocking event in that seminar that year. But what it really taught me was the kind of respect that a real scholar not only deserved from his students, but also expected. And he did focus a lot on giving credit where credit is due. And I just wonder how someone like Halil Bey would be able to survive in the kind of student evaluation, bureaucratic, assessment, preparation, syllabi, all of that stuff, because indeed he never did prepare. He was stream of consciousness. He would get up and he would talk, and what he said made sense, and you just had to catch up to the guy. He was so far ahead, but he had so much to say, yet we had no support. We had really, no clue what he was expecting from us in the beginning. It was like, okay, I heard what he did, and so I can't do that. So how am I going to do this? So I just don't think that there are people like Halil Bey who could survive the bureaucratized form of education that we are, cursed with these days. I wonder if any of you also find the contrast to be almost overwhelming. Just the opposite. It's the opposite of what Halil Bey did.
I think as Grigor said in his final remark, he was a different man of a different era. I imagine in many ways we live in a different reality now. And when I think about it, I cannot imagine any one of us or any one of our colleagues ever get close to his productivity, his sort of vitality, his degree of knowledge. It is just, it's very humbling to look at his long list of publications and say, not feel so little. I think this was a very different time. It must have been a very different reality. We are not like that anymore, and teaching is also quite different. I think you made a very good point. There were a few people who also wanted to contribute. Maria Kiprovska was going to be next. Maria, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for organizing this wonderful event commemorating the memory of Halil İnalcık. He was my Hoca for almost 10 years, as in the case of Grigor, and I also have a lot of memories of him. But in spite of all this autocratic and selfish figure that he was actually also a person who very much was keen to learn from the others. And I see that from all the nationalities that we've been gathered here. I mean, he picked it up his students and wanted some feedback and to learn something from their natural ethnic background as well. It's not actually accidental that we ended up me and Grigor being students of Inalcik, and I do remember that he would be calling us, asking for documents from the Bulgarian archives, or just asking for some advice to how this would be interpreted and stuff like that. Stuff that we would supposedly know better than him. Of course, he was the person he was. He always wanted to be referred to. I have many papers returned with the same marks. You don't read me enough. You don't. I'm very disappointed that you don't refer to my stuff enough. But he was right. I mean, what if you don't read Inalcik's stuff? That means that you haven't even learned the basics. And his stuff is not only basics, but it's very deep research. Each time I go back to his articles, I read them with a different mind now, and I find something different. And only now I understand, after years of training with being trained with Inalcik, that what he meant by saying "Beni roman gibi okunma." So, I mean, this is not a novel. That's true. And all of his studies are full of information that you can't possibly digest in one tape. So this is his legacy. And as much as we may be critical of his studies nowadays, we're building on him very much and trying to deepen actually what he has not only scratched, but really deepened as a knowledgeable person as he was. So that was my take. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think his stature in socioeconomic history of the Ottoman Empire is unmatchable, and it is, in a sense, sad that the field moved a little bit away from the gravity of the field moved a little bit away from socioeconomic history to more cultural history aspects, etc. At the beginning, this was welcome, but at this moment in time, I think when I consider about how many years passed and what he published in that thick book is still what we have, and only maybe now the young generation, there are a few people who are working on some of the things that he said that he didn't quite follow up with. For instance, çiftlik debate, is something that hopefully will reinvigorate it. I'm going to see whether there's anyone else who would like to add. Actually, I do see someone here. I see Emre Yalçın, who was an editor for Halil Bey, and I think that would be very useful to hear a little bit from him too, because while we all speak in English and we mostly read his work in English, he also had a huge impact in Turkey, even though he thought they did not appreciate him because I believe early on in his first stage of his career at Ankara University, I think he felt underappreciated. When he came back to Bilkent and then started producing all the translations of his work, he became very well known in Turkey. And Emre Yalçın was very instrumental in that process. Emre, would you like to tell a few things about his publications in Turkey?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can stop myself and just limit to myself a few things. While listening, I felt a bit sad and very happy at the same time, not discovering that I'm not alone about my feelings about him, my experiences about him. So it's an honor to be part of such a conversation, such a session. Thank you very much. So I studied history, and while I was studying history in Boğaziçi University, we obviously read his articles. And despite the heavy language and impenetrability of his texts for an undergrad student, I was amazed, and I thought his articles all around should be published all together. Then I became an editor in İş Bankası Kültür Yayınları in 2005. Our director introduced me to him in 2006 and to prepare a book of him. And I was amazed, but I was also kind of terrified. I didn't know how to what exactly to do and how to give him my suggestions as an editor. But anyway, it was clear that my suggestions would only be about style and continuity and other technical issues. And so the book was the history of textiles in Turkey, but the Turkish version. We started working on it, and he got really relieved seeing that I was doing what he really needed about all this style and writing, other small technical issues. So, in fact, it's paved the way for more books from 2070. We published the book in 2007, and I published his 11th book in 2016 after he passed away. And he said, I feel very comfortable, and I'm happy to be able to produce so much and seeing them properly published here with Kültür Yayınları and you. This was pampering, but at the same time, this was not a very simple editor-author relationship. when I met him, he was about 90, and he frequently came to Istanbul to work on the books he handed over me. But then in 4 or 5 years, his health got deteriorated. I started to visit him in Ankara, in Bilkent. We met for a book at least for 2 times and go through all the problems and corrections. And in the meantime, he forged a real, genuine, I can't say friendship because I don't see myself as an equal, and friendship is among equals, but he felt me so. He really cared about my private life and followed up what's going on in my family. And he also told me many things about his own private life, his happinesses and the things he was not very happy that much, in a very sincere way. And he also paid a lot of attention to celebrate after each and every book is published. And he also quoted, I think, Ulu Bey, that each victory should be celebrated. Otherwise, you don't feel it's like a victory. So he said, this is not a victory, but this is a good job and it deserves a celebration. And we went out and have a lunch. And I had a lunch and usually drank something. At some point, he stopped drinking with his doctor's suggestions. But he insisted me on drinking. I said, okay, if you don't drink, I'm not going to drink. But he said, no, go ahead, because I can't drink. And it's a joy for me to watch you drink. And yeah, back to the books we published. I start with my first visit to his apartment in Bilkent lodgings. I went there with our general manager of Türkiye İş Bankası Kültür Yayınları, Ahmet Salcan. And his apartment is quite big, like 4 rooms or so at least, and a huge living room. And there were piles of books all around. Piles here, piles there, and piles in another room, piles in another room. And I was curious looking at these piles of books to figure out what they could be. And he said, Emre Bey, you know, I know you are curious about these piles, and I'm going to tell you, these are piles of books I'm going to finish writing and then give to you to work on. So these piles really disappeared one by one, like 1 or sometimes more than 1 per year. And the most striking thing about these piles, the piles were striking, but each time I visited him, I see a very fresh book, maybe 10 days or a week old out of the print house that is added on top of it. And he was very keen on finding fresh research that would support or even change his views in the books. His last student told about this, and it was very touching for me. So he somehow managed to be aware of what's going on through his assistants and some colleagues, I guess, on the scenery. And he was doing this when he was in his 90s and towards the age of 100. And he was also very keen about not playing with the footnotes, because he had some bad experiences with some publication houses, I guess, that they added a footnote and the numbers got screwed up and everything got mixed, and the result was not very good. So he made some specific phone calls to me, asking, Emre Bey, I got a fresh dissertation or fresh book, and it's so important. I want to add a footnote to this section, but assure me that it's not going to mess up everything. I always told him, okay, I'm not going to mess up anything. Add as much as you like. And yeah, and he was like this until his last days, until he moved to the care house. And that made me always surprised and inspired. That I feel it, I find it quite inspiring. He was also keen in the language. I was surprised about some wordings he chose, and one day I asked him, how come do you write in such fresh Turkish? He said, you know, being understandable is essential for me. I want to be read and understood by younger generations for at least 4 or 5 decades. For example, my Professor Barkan's articles are not understandable by new generations, and I don't want to be like him. I don't want to get lost in the traps of language. And I said, okay, how do you do it? He said, the school gives me 2 assistants for this. I make them read my articles or chapters, and I want them to summarize it back to me. When I see they don't understand the part, I discuss with them how and transform it to a version that they can understand. So you got these updated versions of my Turkish. And I said, this is great. You should put it into, you should write about this. And I think he, I don't remember exactly which volume, but he put this explanation into one of his forwards of Devlet-i Aliye books. Yeah, I think I should stop because I should stop somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Emre. I really appreciate this. We could not represent his stature in Turkey here because a lot of people who read him don't necessarily feel very comfortable talking in English. He, in the last 2 decades of his life, ended up having a big impact in Turkey because of actually Emre's work right here. He just told us he was publishing the 11th volume of his works from İş Bankası the year after he passed away.
And they went on, yeah, they went on, and it's on 15th book.
Yeah. So he definitely is much more appreciated today than he was in his first career at Ankara University. He came to be known as the father of Ottoman history in Turkey as well.
Let me add some material data. We printed the first volume of Devlet-i Aliye, his last big work on Ottoman Empire, and it covers from the early periods to the 20th century. So the first book came out, and you probably know the most print run is about between 1,000 and 2,000. We were not very sure about, well, we were sure that 1,000 is low, but should we go for 1,500 or 2,000? We went with 2,000. It went away. We started to make reprints almost twice a month. And the first volume, I don't know the last numbers because I'm retired 6-7 years ago, and I'm not keeping up the fresh data, but like 5 years ago, it sold over 100,000 copies.
Wow.
And the other volumes of Devlet-i Aliye didn't sell as much as the first volume, but they are close. And he couldn't believe these figures. That who is reading? These are somehow textbooks, and I wasn't expecting, but this is something very good. I'm very happy, he said. Yeah, most of his books in İş Bankası made at least 2, 3, 4 print runs, even the most heavy and most niche ones.
I'm really that his YouTube appearances created a curiosity, because he's very good at, I watch them and I find some of them so interesting. So I think his public-facing work may have been also sort of enhanced by his appearances on television, on these interviews.
Yeah, you're right, because it was a time when this Ottoman history became something of a subject of mainstream or popular curiosity. There were too many history shows in Turkish TV, and he appeared in a few of them, and well, they always revered him, and he, filled his shoes very well. It contributed to that, but there was such an interest going on, and he just responded it to in the right time, I guess, and no doubt the right, the perfect, in the perfect way that could be, in one of the perfect ways that could be, right? So it's this is going down, but it's never been like it's been before. So much more people are into history, and it's a good thing that his books are also selling, because there are books all around, but it's good that something like Devlet-i Aliye sells over 100,000 copies.
Yes, that's a great number. We are at the end of our time, but I see Victor's hand up. Victor, why don't you say, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm amused to hear about his drinking, because even going back to Chicago when he was young, and I was young, we went to dinner countless times, and he was always very moderate. So I'm kind of disappointed. Maybe he knew that with a Slav, he was no contest. But Baki lamented about the going away from social economic history of the past. Also, he was, as I mentioned in my memoir, in my article, he was a document-oriented historian, source-oriented historian, but he was, there's this talk of document fetishism from the 90s, and he was the antithesis of a document fetishist. For him, the world was not within the documents, it was the documents that opened up the world and new worlds that we didn't know about. So that, I think, is very important to remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Müge Hocam, your hand was up earlier.
Yeah. I just wanted to also thank Emre Yalçın for publishing all the books in Turkey later on, because what was very important when I was a graduate student and working with him, he said, oh my God, my greatest worry in life is to die and have all this knowledge in my head stay and die with me. He says, I have to get all of this out, and I cannot, because I'm teaching and I'm doing all these other things. When will I ever have the time? And I said, Hocam, we should just put you in a room and then, give you a tape recorder at the time. And then, we can deliver you food and you can stay there for a month. Would you do it? And he said, yes, I would do it. But I'm so glad it didn't come to that he eventually was able to get out all that was in him, because his first publication of sort of the Ottoman Empire, the classical age, he was very upset about that publication, because he thought that Norman Itzkovitz, who sort of did the translation, whatever, actually he thought plagiarized his work and got a book out of it himself based on Inalcik's documentation. So he had a very sort of hard time with his books published in English here, I think, in the United States. And he was always looking forward to having all his books and works published in Turkey, in Turkish. I'm so glad he was able to do that later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Müge Hocam. Thank you so much, Linda, Fariba, for doing this volume. And thank you for everyone who participated and shared their memories. Of course, we can never thank Halil Bey enough for all the work that he produced, but it is good to remember him. And as Fahri was saying, if he saw this, he would really be happy because it is true. Vefa is very significant, and so we are doing our debt of Vefa to him. Thank you so much for everyone. I hope I can see some of you at another WhatsApp meeting in one of the future OTSA events. Have a wonderful day and a good long weekend. Enjoy the Veterans Day weekend. We talked about a great veteran of history today, so it is actually fitting. Great. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Bye.